So I appreciate everyone being here on a Friday afternoon. And I guess you guys are going to be seeing two presentations today. This one about, we'll be talking about kind of like tier one, what is our basic expectations for instructional spaces. I know you'll see in some places it says classroom, but really it's not just classroom. What we're talking about is classrooms, dorms, any therapy rooms, any place that's an instructional space. And what are we doing for for all of our students? Understanding that many of our students have a number of additional support needs that are on top of kind of the most basic educational needs and functional needs, but we need to have a place that we have as a basic sort of thought process for all these areas. And it's going to look different in different places. It's going to look different in a dorm than it does in a classroom. It's going to look different in a therapy. I mean, so not all of these things are universal to everyone all the time, but in terms of, especially in the case of classrooms or dorms when there's maybe more group instruction going on, these are sort of our base expectations that you want to see everywhere and hope to see in your own, if you have children, that you hope to see in your own child's classroom or wherever they are. So that's kind of why we're having this conversation, is all of us, staff and students alike, we all thrive on some amount of predictability. Having a schedule we know to follow, we know where we're supposed to be, we kind of can anticipate what's coming next. Some of us can roll with changes better than others, but we all thrive under that idea. So that predictability helps us feel successful because we know what's coming and we know hopefully what to expect, and then we start to try to integrate what are those changes going to look like. And everything we're going to be talking about today is going to be coming from just sort of evidence-based practices across the education field. A lot of it's special ed based, but some of it general education as well, because ultimately all of our students require and deserve access to the general education curriculum, and then anything on top of that to be successful and to access their education and to make progress in the curriculum. So as a field, the evidence-based practices, research-based practices, it's a big thing you'll hear a lot anywhere you go in the education world. And everyone has kind of, certainly here we have a bit and other places struggle with how do we sort of integrate that into what we're already doing? And how do we take what we know works and what we know doesn't work and make those changes? And we've all been part of that. I certainly, and there's also additional layers, coming out of, certainly we're still dealing with some of the aftermath of COVID. Us, like many other schools, are dealing with staff shortages that are really impacting our ability, some of our things, and but we have to kind of address that reality as we go. So as I said, we're going to be talking about, did I jump yet? And I kind of hit this up already, but what are our school-wide expectations? How do you set up classroom or dorm expectations? And what are those sort of additional IEP special ed expectations? So what we're going to be talking about is, lesson planning, engagement and instructional time, schedules, which I've already mentioned. Within here, I call supportive materials. So that could be assistive technology, that could be an adult support, that could be standards and gate trainers, anything else we have in place to help a student access their educational materials and their curriculum. And then we'll touch a little bit on the physical classroom environment as well. And what we're doing today is really kind of not a first step, but along the lines of what we've been talking about all year of how do we make sure that we're delivering the highest possible quality instruction to all of our students and setting everyone up for success. Understanding that not everything works the way we want it to all the time, and hopefully we can make some of those changes. So first, what are our values here at MSB? Does anyone have those at the ready? hear integrity, I hear transparency, collaboration, accountability. All right, that's all four. Very good. So yes, I act. Integrity, accountability, collaboration, and transparency. And really, how we kind of talk about this today is the idea that no one person, no one shift, no one classroom, no one related service provider, no one anybody owns any students. We are all responsible for student programming, and we're all collaborating together to give the students what they need. So kind of keeping that in mind, I think the collaboration piece, and it's challenging here. I mean, we have students who are here 24 hours a day for a week, and that's 3 shifts of people who need to be involved. We have students with every related service that we offer, so that's a lot of people even on the daytime team. So I'm not saying this isn't a challenge. I just, something we want to keep in mind as we're going forward, that none of this works if we're not kind of all at the same place. So I'll take us back, and people may or may not remember this. So it's within our student handbook, there are 3 behavioral expectations, 3 behavioral standards that really encompass the whole school. So I'm going to see if anyone remembers what they are. Well, you can do it on here. Let's put it up here. You can yell it out if you want to, too.
Be safe.
Be safe is one. Be responsible.
Be
Close. Be respectful. Very good. I don't know who said it. It was Pam. Thank you. Yes.
Be safe, be respectful, be responsible.
I didn't know there was a song. It's the first I'm hearing it. So these are our school-wide expectations, and I do appreciate the musical accompaniment. I will not be singing. No one wants that, but I appreciate it. So yes, these are our 3 behavior standards across the entire school. We have our little dancing bee. So be safe, be respectful, be responsible. And I'll just be honest, and again, I've been here a long time, and I'm just as much a part of this as anybody, is we haven't talked about these in a few years. And I'm going to go on a limb and say new people, people who have been here less than 5 years may not have heard this before. It's in a lot of our documentation, but it's not something we've talked about. So again, as we're setting the stage for every student and staff person to be successful, this is what we want everyone to be following. So we have to set those school-wide expectations, and only then once we have school-wide expectations that we've communicated to everybody, students and staff alike, only then can we really understand what a student's additional needs might be. Other than that, we're just kind of throwing things in the wall in the hope that something sticks. But if we have some sort of basic outlined expectations for everybody, we then gives us a stage to jump off of to really help understand, well, what's additional that some students might need that those 3 things don't necessarily encompass all the time. So, the idea of being proactive versus reactive. The idea, and I won't read these to you. I mean, they're up here, and if anyone needs me to read them out, I'm happy to. But what we have up here is, how do we proactively set the stage for students to be successful? Kind of going back to those 3 behavioral expectations is, we have to define what good behavior or what appropriate behavior looks like. Because if we don't have that, we don't know, again, what we're aiming for. And all students, kids in special education, kids in general education, kids who go here, kids who go to private schools, public schools, part of what we're also teaching is not content, but also behavior. I have younger-ish kids at home, and I have to do the same thing. And the pendulum tends to swing here a little bit in we either way over-expect or we way undervalue what a student's able to do. I feel we have, and that's a struggle. It's a struggle for everybody. is we either, don't expect enough of our students, so we're not pushing them. We're making sure they're never uncomfortable, they're never frustrated, but that's part of education, that's part of learning. On the other end of that, we expect some of our students to be way more advanced and independent than even their chronological age would tell us they should be. I've heard in the past, again, we're all guilty of this, and I'm sure I have been as well, of talking about a kid of like, well, they should be doing this independently, they should know how to do this, I shouldn't have to teach it. But what you're talking about is an 8-year-old. My 9-year-old can do almost nothing by himself, as much as I try, and as much as he's capable some days. There is behavioral expectations and supports I need to put in place. So we often look at our students, especially those kids who are more in the quote-unquote academic classes, like, oh, they should be able to do that independently. Okay, not at 8 years old, they shouldn't. That's not an appropriate expectation for anybody. So we're teaching behavior as much as we're teaching reading, writing, and math. And what we want to focus on, in terms of the consequence piece, and again, this isn't just about how do we get somebody in trouble, but what are appropriate and what are natural consequences to actions. The example I always use, and I do it at home too, is, I hear a lot, I've heard it here, and I hear it sometimes at home. It's like, well, they can't go outside without a coat on, it's too cold. The natural consequence is that they'll be cold. Typically, it doesn't get cold enough around here for anyone to get hurt. It's cold enough to be uncomfortable, but that typically won't kill anybody. So what is the natural consequence? Let's learn that lesson in the way that it's there. That's fine. Again, that's not true of every kid, but we have to be, we want to make sure that we're really not over or underdoing it and allowing students to make those mistakes. So in terms of what are those intervention strategies, what are we looking at here? And again, this is for every student, understanding that many of our students will need addition above and beyond just sort of what's up here. But this is for everybody. And if we don't have some of these basic expectations set out, we can't build on them. So effective at design, implementation, and differentiation in these practices to meet the needs of the majority of students. And again, understanding that many of our students don't look like the majority of kids out in schools. So and that's from there we build the more intense, build for more intense needs, and it may mean that they need direct services and things, or it may just mean that we need to modify the environment to better meet their needs. So again, explicit social skills instruction, frequent prompts and reminders, engaging instruction, opportunities for reinforcement, and specific instructional feedback. So, and even those students that this is not enough for, we do not back off of those things for those students as well. We still want to keep that in place, and there's a consistency. And if we're all talking kind of the same language, it's, whichever provider, whichever teacher, whichever dorm a student is in, they're hearing a lot of the same things. And I'm going through this very quickly, but these are important strategies for every student in every school. So again, I'm not going to read these to you, but looking at here, we have, thinking of our 3 positive school-wide expectations. You want to, as a classroom, as a therapist, as a dorm, working in a dorm, what are your expectations, and what are your 3 to 5 positive expectations for your classroom, for your dorm, for your area, whatever that looks like. Active engagement and high rates of opportunities to respond. We're going to be talking about that a little bit more later, but the 4th bullet, we're going to be spending a lot of time over the next year talking about that. Not true of every kid, so I want to be clear. But it is much harder to get in trouble as a child if you're actively engaged in what you're supposed to be doing. If you were bored, and we have all worked with kids that have gotten bored, does that typically work out for you when they're bored? No. Most of our students, a lot of our students, I shouldn't say most, and some of our students kind of go the range, is if they're bored, they'll just sit there and wait for you to tell them what to do. And those kids often come across as like, oh, they're really nice kids, the easy kids to work with, even though they're just sitting there doing nothing. The other kids who get bored and then throw, say, a chair at you, they have figured out how to fill their time. And as us as the professionals, if we have not filled their time for them, they will figure out a way to do so. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say there's not a person in here who can't think of a kid who can fill their time with maybe chair throwing. And in some cases, a chair if you're lucky. Some of us have had things thrown at us that was worse than a chair. So I bring these up as, that's kind of what we're looking at here, is what is our engagement? Do the students have an opportunity to respond and be an active participant in the class as much as possible? And then some of the other areas here, and these are all, again, these are tier 1 supports. These are evidence-based practices for every student in any school. So, active supervision. So again, we have fairly small classes, but, is a student doing what they're supposed to be doing? Are we all involved in monitoring what the kids in the class are doing? And I'm going to say class, but again, understand that you can apply this to most situations. Specific praise, again, are we praising students for doing what they're supposed to do? Are we recognizing when they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, when they're doing well, and really telling them what's going on? Like, oh, you're doing a great job is nice, but doesn't really tell them what they're doing. They may not know, and they may think, well, okay, well, I was doing some work and picking my nose. So she must be really proud of me for picking my nose. That's great. And again, looking, and we all know this, like, we want the positive to outweigh the negative as much as possible. We want everybody leaving with feeling good about themselves. That higher self-esteem leads to better outcomes. So I'm going very quickly through all this. So if anyone has anything, feel free to. Don't throw a chair at me or anything else, but feel free to yell it out. And everyone will have access to this, so I don't want to read this to you, but again, what we're doing is just making sure that we're all on the same page at this point. And we talked about this a little bit, but I think it's worth talking about. What is our proactive strategies that we should all be doing? And this goes across, again, every area. Lesson planning. If you're going to be working with a student, what is your intended outcome? What should they know? Our periods right now are 45 minutes. What should they know in 45 minutes that they don't know now? What do you want them to be able to demonstrate to you in 45 minutes that they can't do now? And if you don't know that when walking in, you don't have a plan. Because you don't know what you're assessing. You don't know, was this successful? Or they learned something, but did they learn what I wanted them to learn? Schedules, whatever that means for our individual students. Some of that is, here's your paper schedule, follow this throughout the day, or print, braille, whatever. Some of our kids need a lot more modification to follow a schedule. But again, that predictability, that knowing what's coming is going to be so important for many of our kids. And for many of you, you know that already. This is not new information. And you also know what happens when something unpredictable happens. Again, the chair. So, time on meaningful tasks. Again, this is the boredom piece. Are they working on something meaningful? Do they understand the meaning of what they're doing? Many of our students are nonverbal. Many of our students have learning disabilities, intellectual disabilities, cognitive disabilities. They still need the chance to learn, like, what am I doing and why am I doing it? Because if we're not doing that, we are selling them short. We're not giving them the benefit of the doubt that they can understand, and it may take a lot of repetition, but we need that needs to happen. Chances for expressive and receptive communication. For many of our students, this is a big focus and should be a big focus of their time and their day. Many of our students, and again, this is not new information. I certainly didn't make this up. But if a kid throws a chair at you, they are communicating. They have told you something. You may not know what, other than get out of the way of the chair, but they are telling you something. So what we're working towards is, well, how do they tell us in a way that doesn't involve a dangerous metal object flying at my head? Or at another kid's head, for that matter. How do we do that? So making sure that students have access to their tools for communication, whatever that means for those students. That could mean AAC devices, that could mean switches, that could mean sign language, that could mean, again, you name it, that's what it can mean. What we hope to get away from is the chair flying towards you as their main form of communication. Access to supportive materials, I already talked about that a little bit. And again, that physical environment. So there's six of these that we're going to look at. And I've talked about these a little bit already. This just gives a little bit more detail as to what they mean. What does the physical environment look like? And that looks different for some of our students than others. I mean, we have classrooms with kids, they're in regular desks, they're sitting in chairs, they're doing their work. We have other students who really need to look at that environment very critically and make sure that it is set up so everyone can move around safely. It is hard to learn if you do not feel safe. I mean, that's if you feel at any point that you are unsafe, like and I said this last time, if I was up here doing this whole thing, but I had a large knife in my hand the whole time, what would you all be looking at?
The knife?
The large knife, yes. Even if I'm not doing anything dangerous with it, even if I'm not like going at anybody, I'm just standing up here and I've got a large knife, you're not going to feel safe. I don't have one, I just want to be clear, I have no knife. But if I had one, you would not feel safe, and nothing I say would matter at this point. You would not be listening to me. You'd be looking at that knife. And as that may sound like an overdone metaphor, for some of our students, any little bit of not feeling safe, whatever their history is, that could raise them to a level of just a huge trauma response of, okay, well, here's the chair. There you go. I'm communicating with you now. Teaching, we won't go deep into the classroom teaching matrix, but again, expectations, rules, and routines. This is the whole thing we've been talking about. Have you articulated your expectations to everyone in the room? As the teacher, have you done that? As the therapist, have you done that? As the dorm supervisor, have you done that? And do the other staff and the students, whoever they are, understand what are your expectations, what are the rules, and what are our routines that we're going to be following? And that takes time to build. That takes time to learn those things. Active supervision, again, we're not backing off. We're not sitting in the back of the room the whole time, or if we are, we're doing it in a way that we can see what kids are doing. We don't want to be hovering the whole time. We want kids to be learning independence, obviously. But again, especially once you get into those teenage years, leave them to their own devices. They will figure out a way to not be bored. And, there's hardly a student, especially once you get in the middle of high school, again, just speaking for my own house, if I give them the chance to just sit there and watch YouTube all day, well, that's what they're going to do. Encouraging appropriate behavior. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Continuum of responses for inappropriate behavior. Again, what is appropriate? What is a natural consequence if there is one? What is is it something that you can just ignore? Is it something you need to actively engage in? Is it, closer proximity to a kid? Is that going to be enough to prompt them to maybe I should stop messing around? That's going to look a little bit different, but understand as you learn your students, what is your continuum of responses? And how does that fit in with the school expectations and with your classroom or dorm or whatever expectations? And have those been articulated to everybody and then they're aware of them? And again, you may have to repeat them many times, but have you done that? I think this last one is probably, for me, one of the most important. Again, talked about this already a little bit, but engagement and opportunities to respond. If a kid is sitting in a classroom for 45 minutes, and for 44 of those minutes they have very little to do or no interaction with them, have they learned much? Probably not. So you want, again, frequent opportunities for students to respond, that they are engaged in the instruction, that they are part of the class. Are they using their switches? Are they using sign language? Are they using an AAC device? Are they talking? Are they working in groups? Are they working individually? Whatever it is. But again, it's got to be a pretty constant period of like, are they doing something active and are they part of what's going on? So, again, lesson plans, and again, this looks a little bit different, for teachers versus other providers and things, but, the expectation for teachers is that lesson plans, again, kind of your basic outline for the week is done weekly and turned in, and you understand what each lesson, what your intended outcome is. Again, if you don't know that, what are you teaching? And are you assessing them? At the end of the 45 minutes, you have a way to say, okay, well, I think they got this, or I think they didn't, and I need to rework it a little bit. And that all goes with just kind of the cycle of teaching, giving time for practice, and assessing your students as they're moving forward. Alignment to pacing guides, scope and sequence, whatever it is. Again, many of our students have significant learning difficulties. I'm aware of that, certainly, but it becomes really hard to spend 3 months on a single topic. You have to, if you're spending that much time, maybe something else needs to work, or maybe we need to move on and figure out how do we backfill that information in a different way, because we need students to be moving, and I think of our students especially who are before this year, what we're in our functional program. There are students who were not working, maybe were or were not working towards a high school diploma, but we were not necessarily giving them the curriculum that would move them towards that. So how do we accelerate that as much as possible? Understanding that, we have to make accommodations, we have to make modifications, but if we haven't tried to work a student through the standard curriculum and given them that opportunity and put all those accommodations in place, and then we move them to a non-diploma track or to the alternate track, it's a disservice, because we don't know that they needed that. We just know that they weren't being successful. We don't know because they didn't have the ability or because we did not do it correctly. And we need that structure in place. So again, as you're planning, what are you going to do? Is like, well, you really want to have a map for the year. Lesson objectives are communicated to everyone in the room. I think we do, one of the great things about MSB that you don't see in other places is the number of, now, get crowded sometimes, but when we have related service providers in classrooms, when we have dorm staff in classrooms, everyone needs to know what the objective is. Not just the students, not just the teachers, paraeducators, related service providers, the students especially. If they don't know what they're, like, why am I doing this? Because then it's just busy work. And again, having that map, for the year. And what this does, and looking at this is, and again, most of our students need some individualized differentiation in their instruction. But if you don't have a plan, if you don't have an objective, there's no way to do that, because you don't know what everyone needs, so there's no way to whittle it down to what does this kid need, what does this kid need. All right. So, I think that's a big piece of, the expectations that we have an idea of what we're doing today, what we're doing next week, and where we're headed. Schedules, same thing. This, again, so important for so many of our students, but even those kids who aren't quote unquote schedule dependent, every kid wants to know what's coming next. Every person wants to know that. All right, again, hopefully you had some idea of what you were coming here for today, but if you didn't, it's like, well, what am I doing? Why am I going here? Unpredictability, again, makes you feel unsafe, makes you feel kind of unmoored, and you don't know what you're supposed to be doing. So we want to make sure all of our student and staff, all of our schedules are up to date, things change, I get that, but we want to make sure that students have access to their schedules, and others on the educational team also have access to those schedules. I mean, especially I think with related services, if you're planning to come in and work with a student during English class, and you walk in and they're doing history or cooking, because, well, I had to, we're not following that, it's just, that's what it says on the schedule. Well, then that person's intended outcome also doesn't get to be worked on. And that student's access is now diminished in some way. And all these things I'm saying I'm not saying because we're not necessarily doing them. I just want to we all want to make sure that we're all on a kind of a level playing field, and that these expectations are understood by everybody. All right. So moving right along, time on meaningful tasks. So what does that mean? Again, students who are engaged are less likely to exhibit problem behaviors. If you're bored, you're going to fill your time. That's just true. So integrating those supports into classrooms makes sense for all students because it promotes academic and social competence. And that's what we're going for all of our students. Academic and social competence. We want students to leave here, whether it's when they graduate or they go back to their local school system, are they able to be an active member of their community, for whatever that means for that student. So, again, when we're teaching academics, we're also teaching behavior. For any of us, who went through school, and we all went through some form of school to be here, you could get away with certain things in a school maybe that you can't get away with in a job. Or there's expectations on an adult that don't necessarily land on a 9-year-old child. But that teaching has to have happened somewhere along the line. Quality instruction reduces the likelihood of students engaging in problem behaviors. Implementation of positive behavior supports leads to increased academic engagement time and enhanced academic outcomes. And that, again, this is research-based, evidence-based stuff that's out there of when we do, when engaging, strong instruction is happening, students don't tend to get as involved in problem behaviors. And those students who have a higher level of behavioral need, obviously that's where we start to identify those other supports. But for 95% of students, that's not the case. These sorts of things tend to work in some way or another. And then children who fall behind academically are less likely to find academic work pleasant, and they will get easily frustrated or engage in problem behaviors to escape. Again, I think we can all think of at least one kid that we've worked with that will do that. So, again, looking at instruction, I won't read these things to you here, but again, students are going to fill the time. So we don't want them merely busy. Again, that's where that meaningful tasks come in. So are they active? Are they intellectually engaged? Are you pushing them past what is just their comfort level? All of our students have IEPs. It means all of our students have instructional, and knowledge gaps. And you can't close gaps without pushing students past their comfort level. Again, with support and with teaching, but again, if you have a student who has a second grade reading level and they're in the 10th grade, if you never give them anything that's above a second grade reading level, will they ever progress? They may not progress. There may be other learning issues getting in the way. But if you've never given them anything above that ease level of second grade reading, are they ever going to make any progress? No. They're going to be really great at reading second grade material, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But we're never going to get them to go anywhere else. So there's got to be that push. There's got to be that sense of urgency that we don't have these students for very long. All right, communication, again, I won't, behavior is communication. Hopefully I'm not the first person you're hearing that from. So behavior is communication. If someone throws something at you, they are definitely trying to tell you something. If I'm walking up here around with a knife, I'm definitely trying to send a message. I don't know what that message is, but I'm definitely trying to send it. So it's, again, important. Every student has access to their communication tools throughout the day. That could mean communication boards, that could mean their schedules, that could mean switches, AACs, whatever it is. Do they have full access to communication tools throughout the day? And staff need to be comfortable with those communication devices. And that's where I know, speech does a lot of training with folks, and if you don't understand something, yell it out. But, walking into classrooms and we know there's 3 kids in there with communication devices and they're all in book bags, do they have the opportunity to communicate? No. The bag can probably communicate, but the kid can't. All right, materials and equipment. Accessibility, and you guys, I believe after this, everyone goes to the ableism. Yes, after this, you all go, and hopefully what I've said, put in the context of what you're going to hear next around ableism and what that means for our students. The idea that having these ableistic ideas, lack of accessibility, is we are setting up barriers for our students. We're causing additional disabilities above and beyond what they're dealing with already. If I walked in here, and again, there's a group in here that can, but if I handed out Braille to everyone in here, would everyone be able to read it? No. Some of you could, but many of you could not. And I then expect you to read that and understand it. Have I been fair? No. So if I do the same thing to a student, have I taught them anything? No, because they don't have any access. So again, that can mean AT, that could mean Braille, that can mean print, that can mean large print, whatever it means for that student. Tactile objects, real objects, whatever that means. So it's important that we have those throughout the day. Again, layout and physical environment. I'm not going to get deep into this right now, but this kind of goes along the same lines. Understanding that having these things in place, we've learned about CVI, we've learned about visual clutter, we've done all these things, and just setting up that environment for a student to be successful. And controlling what we can control, understanding that we have students that make noises, we have students that can't control those things, we can't control that. What we can control is the physical environment of the classroom. And then, for all of our students, IEP. The IEP is a legal document, and we are held accountable for what's on there. It's essentially what we have these meetings and we say to our families, this is what we promise to provide in the hopes that your student is going to make progress in these areas. And if we don't provide those things, again, an IEP is not a promise that a student will meet their goals, but if we haven't put all those accommodations and modifications in place, we've broken our promise to everybody. Timelines. I know no one wants to hear this. That 5-day before timeline is not optional. That is state law. So, reports, whatever needs to be done by then. And I understand there's time crunch a lot of times, but those things cannot fly by us, because what could happen, and I'm sure Kristen will be happy to explain this even more, is there's no IEP police. No one's going to be, the IEP SWAT team's not going to be coming in through the windows. But a parent takes us to due process or mediation, and if nothing else, we've missed all these timelines, we now owe that student compensatory ed, even if nothing else we've done is really wrong. Because what they will say is, well, we don't know that because you didn't follow the basic expectations. And then it's on us. We did that. And then obviously compliance. And using the tools. We have the IEP review checklist. We have other tools. Please use those. And certainly, I know Kristen's happy to answer questions, but really fall back on the documentation we already have. We've created a lot of these things. Kristen maintains a lot of them. And please use those first. All right, we're getting to the end here. I know I have no time, but I have 2 minutes. So obviously state standards is what we're following. For some students, it's the regular, the typical standards. For some students, it's alternate standards. this is to address priority gap areas. You can't write an IEP with 400 goals and make up every instructional gap a kid's ever had. You've really got to focus it. And then academic achievement and functional performance. At the end of the day, we're a school. Certainly, I in no way diminish anything along the lines of functional skills, but academics needs to be our first priority, and access to that education, and then building those functional skills as well. I mean, that where it says present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, that order of that is not an accident. That was written like that on purpose. So again, I went through all of this very quickly, and hopefully the context of the ableism conversation next will put some of this into perspective of, as you're in a classroom, or as you're teaching, or as you're providing service, whatever that is, would you put your own child in that room? And you have control over a lot of that. And would you put your child in that classroom? And if the answer is no, you want to look at, well, what can I do to change that?